They thought at 38 I was too young for an ironclad contract and too obedient to fight back. They were wrong. When the email freezing my retirement fund lit up my screen, they had no idea they just pulled the pin on a $25 million bomb. I will show you how an invisible woman brought down an Austin tech empire with exactly 3 lines of an email. Welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories, and thank you for being here with us. As you may know, YouTube recently disabled our monetization, meaning we no longer have a budget to keep the channel running. If you find today's story entertaining, please kindly support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel to hear exclusive, true stories that are even better, much longer, and contain highly detailed situations with multiple emotional voiceovers that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can join us by scanning the Patreon QR code on your screen or by clicking the link located in the description or the comments section of this video. Now, let us begin today's story, told from the perspective of our main character, Peyton Perry. It was a perfectly typical Monday morning at the Austin headquarters of Synapse Horizon. The air in the building was thick with the scent of overpriced artisanal espresso and the hollow echo of meaningless corporate jargon. Every corner of the aggressively modern open-plan office hummed with mid-level managers discussing agile paradigms, synergistic alignment, and bandwidth optimization. I sat in the dead center of it all, wrapped in the cold, mechanical hum of the server racks. I was 38 years old, and I had written the very first lines of the company core architecture when I was just 23. Back in those days, Synapse Horizon was nothing more than 3 exhausted kids in a damp, poorly ventilated garage, surviving on stale cold pizza and the cheapest coffee we could find. Now, it was a sterile billion-dollar glass empire that had conveniently forgotten its own history. My secondary monitor illuminated with a new notification. It was an automated email from the Human Resources Department, specifically bearing the digital signature of Chloe, our director of HR. Chloe was less of a human being and more of a corporate algorithm wrapped in beige designer blazers. She was a woman who spoke entirely in liability-dodging corporate speak. Someone who would fire your entire department and call it a structural realignment opportunity. I clicked open the message, my face expressionless. The subject line read, "Update regarding specialized compensation benefits." I read the body of the email, in 3 brief, rigidly polite paragraphs. It stated that my lifetime retirement and specialized medical fund was being paused indefinitely to optimize our operational budget. That fund was not some frivolous corporate perk. It was blood money. It was established exclusively for me many years ago as a direct compensation for the permanent spinal damage and severe ocular strain I sustained during those early startup years. I had worked 80 to 90 hours a week, staring at glowing lines of code until my vision blurred, sacrificing my youth and my health to build the very foundation this entire company stood upon. Now, they were cutting off my sole safety net with the careless click of a button. I knew exactly who was behind this directive: Bradford Vance. Bradford was our newly appointed Chief Executive Officer, fresh off a private jet from Wall Street. He possessed the incredibly arrogant swagger of a man who viewed human beings strictly as line items on a financial spreadsheet. To Bradford, legacy employees like me were nothing but expensive deadweight. We were liabilities that needed to be aggressively trimmed so he could present a beautifully inflated, pristine financial report ahead of the massive global merger he was currently orchestrating. He did not care about the integrity of the code. He did not understand the architecture of our systems. He only cared about maximizing short-term profit margins to secure his own astronomical executive bonus. All around me, the immediate effects of Bradford and his ruthless optimization strategy were already taking hold. The open floor plan, usually vibrating with forced corporate cheer and the clatter of mechanical keyboards, had rapidly descended into a landscape of chaotic whispers. Several desks away from me, a senior developer was hurriedly packing his personal belongings into a brown cardboard box, his face pale and his hands shaking. Across the main aisle, a veteran project manager was quietly sobbing into her phone, realizing her meager severance package would barely cover 2 months of rent. A wave of raw panic swept through the room like a highly contagious virus. Yet, amidst the weeping, the frantic packing, and the heavy atmosphere of despair, I sat completely still. My silence was terrifyingly absolute. Any normal person would have immediately stormed into the HR office. Any normal person would have screamed at Chloe, thrown a coffee mug against the glass walls, or demanded a face-to-face meeting with Bradford Vance himself. I did not shed a single tear. I did not utter a single word of complaint. I did not even let out a heavy sigh of frustration. Instead, a slow, cold, and faint smile crept across my face. It was the specific kind of smile you get when you realize your utterly clueless opponent has just confidently walked directly into a fatal trap. I calmly closed the email client. With precise, deliberate keystrokes, I navigated through the deepest, most secure partitions of my workstation. I effortlessly bypassed the standard internal firewalls, entered a lengthy string of complex alphanumeric passcodes, and opened a heavily encrypted folder hidden far beneath the surface of the company main servers. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and stared at the single file resting securely inside that digital vault. It was a heavily guarded legal document I had not touched in 15 years. The memory hit me with the sharp clarity of perfectly compiled code. 15 years ago, I was exactly 23 years old, dangerously sleep-deprived, and practically living on a diet of cheap vending machine snacks. I was sitting in a cramped, windowless boardroom that smelled faintly of ozone and desperation. Across the cheap veneer table sat the original board of directors. They were 3 men in poorly fitted suits who possessed grand visions but absolutely zero technical capability. They had built a flashy interface, a hollow shell of a product that looked fantastic in marketing presentations, but crashed the entire system the moment it processed more than 50 concurrent users. They were weeks away from total bankruptcy, and they knew it. I was the only person in that room holding a lifeline. I had spent the previous 8 months locked in my tiny apartment, writing a revolutionary data processing algorithm entirely from scratch. It was a flawless piece of logic, the absolute core engine that would eventually allow Synapse Horizon to scale into the massive empire it is today. They desperately needed to own my algorithm to survive. I, on the other hand, needed absolute, unbreakable security. I knew exactly how corporate vultures operated. I knew that once they grew powerful enough, they would inevitably try to discard the very people who poured their blood into the foundation. I slid a thick, legally binding licensing agreement across the table. I refused to hand over the actual ownership of my intellectual property. Instead, I granted them an exclusive, perpetual license to use my code, strictly contingent upon a very specific set of conditions. They laughed aloud when they first read it. They thought it was the paranoid delusion of a socially awkward young programmer, but when I stood up, packed my laptop into my bag, and threatened to walk straight into the headquarters of their largest competitor, their laughter abruptly stopped. They signed the document without changing a single comma. That document contained a highly specific mandate, officially designated as Clause 14D. It was a founder protection mechanism, buried deeply beneath dozens of pages of dense legal terminology. The wording was absolute and left zero room for interpretation. It explicitly stated that any adverse interference, reduction, or cancellation of the Founder Welfare Fund would immediately constitute a material breach of the licensing agreement. In the event of such a breach, it would automatically trigger a mandatory penalty payment of $25 million, to be paid in full within exactly 72 working hours. It was not a standard severance package. It was a nuclear deterrent. Returning my focus to the brightly lit monitors of the present, I felt a deep sense of tranquil satisfaction. The arrogant executives currently running the company had no idea this document even existed. The new leadership and their team of ruthless cost-cutters had completely failed to perform proper due diligence on the foundational contracts. They assumed my medical fund was just a standard employee benefit that could be wiped out with a generic, automated system process. My fingers moved swiftly across the mechanical keyboard. I opened a new message window directed to the highest tier of the corporate legal department. I did not waste my time drafting a long, emotional plea. I did not demand an explanation, and I certainly did not threaten a lawsuit. I kept the message cold, clinical, and surgically precise. The body of the email contained exactly one sentence. Activating Clause 14D due to human resources violation. I attached the original, digitally notarized document of the licensing agreement, clicked send, and closed the window. There was no hesitation. The trap was officially set, and they had already stepped perfectly into the center of it. I stood up, pushed my ergonomic chair beneath the desk, and casually walked toward the employee break room. The office was still buzzing with the chaotic, terrified energy of the recent budget cuts, but I felt entirely detached from the panic. I poured myself a cup of dark roast coffee, taking a quiet moment to appreciate the bitter aroma. On my way back to my desk, I noticed a group of junior developers huddled tightly around a monitor, looking completely overwhelmed. Their staging server was throwing a massive cascade of fatal errors, and they were frantically trying to isolate the root cause. I walked over, holding my coffee mug calmly in one hand. I leaned in, scanning the rapidly scrolling lines of red error logs. It took me exactly 10 seconds to identify the flaw. You have a recursive loop creating a massive memory leak in the secondary database query, I told them smoothly. Kill the active process, rewrite the query to strictly limit the data fetch, and clear your cache immediately. The lead junior engineer blinked, rapidly typed out the commands I suggested, and let out a massive sigh of relief as the server stabilized. He thanked me profusely, completely unaware that the quiet, helpful senior architect standing next to him had just initiated the financial execution of their entire employer. I nodded politely and returned to my workstation, sipping my coffee as if it were just another completely ordinary Monday. Then, the waiting game began. I anticipated some level of immediate resistance, perhaps a frantic phone call from a mid-level attorney or a panicked, aggressive message from human resources, but reality proved to be much more insulting. The clock ticked forward steadily. 1 hour turned into 5. The afternoon faded into evening, and the bustling office slowly emptied out for the night. I packed my bag, drove home, cooked a normal dinner, and slept exceptionally well. When I returned to my desk the next morning, my inbox remained completely empty of any relevant response. The first 24 hours drifted by in complete and absolute silence. It was a profound display of sheer corporate arrogance. The legal department had clearly received my email, but they had undoubtedly categorized it as the harmless rambling of a disgruntled, obsolete employee. To them, I was just a mid-level database architect throwing a tiny tantrum over a canceled insurance policy. They probably forwarded my message to a low-priority folder, planning to send me a generic rejection template whenever they found the spare time. They thought ignoring me would simply make me go away. They believed their sheer size, wealth, and authority made them utterly invincible. They were so blinded by their own towering egos that they completely failed to hear the deafening sound of a countdown timer ticking rapidly toward 0. I later learned exactly what transpired on the 42nd floor while I sat in the silent aftermath of my sent email. Behind the frosted glass doors of the executive suite, Bradford Vance and Chloe were holding a highly confidential strategy meeting. They had my single-line message projected onto a massive wall monitor, illuminating the room with what they considered to be a hilarious joke. To them, my legal demand was not a ticking financial landmine. It was a pathetic comedy routine. Bradford, leaning back in his imported leather chair, swirled a glass of sparkling water and chuckled dismissively. He openly referred to me as a bitter relic, an obsolete coder hopelessly stuck in the past, completely incapable of accepting the new corporate reality. Chloe aggressively agreed, branding my email as a cheap blackmail attempt from an employee desperate to hold on to outdated and expensive privileges. They were absolutely convinced I was merely bluffing to save my medical coverage, assuming I possessed zero leverage against their towering authority. What they completely failed to account for was a junior associate in the legal department named Mia. Mia was young, intensely thorough, and completely untainted by the toxic arrogance that infected the upper management, while the senior partners deliberately ignored my message to go play golf. Mia actually did her job. She spent hours digging deep into the corporate archives, cross-referencing old compliance logs, and eventually pulled the original, notarized licensing agreement directly from the Delaware State Registry. When she read the explicit text of Clause 14D, the color completely drained from her face. Recognizing the catastrophic financial implications, Mia gathered the heavy files and marched straight into the executive suite, bypassing the administrative assistants. She placed the authenticated documents squarely on the polished mahogany desk in front of Bradford. She frantically explained that the signature was legally binding, that the penalty clause was fully active, and that ignoring the demand would definitively cost the company $25 million. "We have to settle this immediately before the deadline expires," she warned him, her voice trembling slightly under the weight of the impending disaster. Bradford did not even bother to open the folder. He glared at Mia with the condescending irritation of a king being bothered by a peasant. He completely dismissed her warning, coldly instructing her to stop wasting executive time on imaginary threats manufactured by disgruntled mid-level staff. He firmly believed that people like me did not have the financial resources, the legal backing, or the courage to engage in a protracted battle against a billion-dollar corporation. Instead of treating the contract as a massive liability, Bradford decided to use it as an excuse to completely break my spirit. He looked over at Chloe and issued a direct, vindictive order. He commanded her to immediately lock my server access, wipe my administrative privileges, and downgrade my physical security clearance. "Let us show this dinosaur exactly who holds the power," he sneered, tossing the unread folder back at Mia. "Cut her off completely. Make her feel entirely useless. She will submit her resignation by Friday." Down on the engineering floor, I felt the immediate effects of their petty retaliation. I attempted to enter the secure server room to perform a routine maintenance check, but the electronic reader blinked a harsh red light, loudly rejecting my employee badge. A few minutes later, I returned to my workstation only to find that my administrative accounts had been abruptly revoked. I was completely locked out of the primary systems I had built with my own two hands from the ground up. They expected me to panic. They expected me to storm up to the executive suite in a blind rage, begging for my job and my access back like a defeated subordinate. Instead, I calmly reached into my pocket, pulled out a small encrypted drive, and plugged it into a concealed port securely hidden under my desk. I launched a highly sophisticated, completely undetectable tracking software I had quietly integrated into the core architecture years ago. While they thought they were locking me out and asserting their dominance, my hidden program was silently capturing every single access log, every unauthorized administrative override, and every digital footprint Bradford and his team were leaving behind. I did not need to fight them. They were actively generating the exact forensic evidence I needed to prove their malicious intent and their deliberate breach of contract. The office around me continued its frantic pace, entirely oblivious to the silent war being waged beneath the surface. I looked at the digital clock on the bottom corner of my screen. The initial 48 hours had officially evaporated into thin air. There were now exactly 24 hours remaining until the mandatory 72-hour deadline of Clause 14D permanently expired. The trap was no longer just set. The heavy steel doors were rapidly swinging shut, and the executives on the 42nd floor were too busy congratulating themselves on their own false brilliance to notice the complete darkness rapidly closing in around them. What the executives on the 42nd floor completely failed to comprehend was that I never trusted a fragile piece of paper to protect my livelihood. Human beings lie constantly. Corporate lawyers twist words to suit their needs. Judges can be bought or tied up in years of expensive, exhausting litigation. Code, however, is absolute. Code does not negotiate a compromise. Code executes exactly as it is written. Clause 14D was never just a physical paragraph sitting in a dusty legal binder in a Delaware filing cabinet. It was a highly sophisticated smart contract, an automated dead man switch that I had personally woven into the deepest foundational roots of the Synapse Horizon core architecture. Years ago, When I built the original data processing algorithm, I embedded a silent, encrypted logic gate within the primary source code. It functioned as a continuous digital heartbeat. It constantly verified the active status of my specific employee credentials and the financial integrity of my founder welfare fund. When Chloe and her human resources software abruptly severed my benefits and locked my administrative access, they did not just breach a legal contract, they tripped an invisible digital wire. Let me explain exactly what happens when that specific wire is tripped. The 72-hour window was not simply a generous grace period for them to cut a check. It was a hard-coded execution timer. If a confirmed deposit of $25 million did not register and authenticate through a highly specific cryptographic hash within that exact time frame, the secondary payload would deploy automatically. It would not delete or destroy anything. Deletion is vandalism, and vandalism is a federal crime. Instead, my smart contract was designed to execute a perfectly legal and devastating maneuver. It would automatically and instantaneously revoke the digital security keys that granted Synapse Horizon the license to access my intellectual property. The entire core algorithm, the vital engine that processed billions of data points every single second, would simply lock its doors, rendering the entire company platform completely paralyzed. The sheer irony of the timing was something not even I could have perfectly planned. As the final hours of the countdown drained away, Bradford Vance was busy bathing in the spotlight of national television. I had left the sterile, frantic environment of the office and walked across the street to a quiet, dimly lit corner coffee shop. I ordered a black Americano, sat at a small wooden table by the window, and propped my phone against my ceramic mug. On the screen, a major financial news network was broadcasting live. There was Bradford, sitting in a sleek studio chair, wearing a bespoke tailored suit that likely cost more than a junior developer earned in a year. He was flashing a brilliant, predatory smile at the camera. He was officially announcing the monumental global merger he had been aggressively pushing for months. "Our core technology is entirely unmatched in the current market," Bradford boasted smoothly, his voice dripping with absolute confidence. "The proprietary algorithm we own and operate is the undisputed backbone of our upcoming expansion. We are not just acquiring a partner today. We are setting the gold standard for the entire tech industry for the next decade." I took a slow sip of my coffee, watching him peddle his magnificent illusions to the world. He was aggressively selling an empire built on a foundation he had carelessly set on fire just 3 days ago. He was loudly bragging about owning an algorithm that, in a matter of minutes, would completely sever ties with his servers. I minimized the live video feed for a moment and opened my hidden diagnostic application. A minimalist black screen appeared, displaying nothing but a stark white timer counting down the final seconds of the 72-hour window. The numbers ticked away with ruthless, unstoppable precision. 10 seconds. I looked through the cafe window at the towering glass facade of the Synapse Horizon headquarters across the street. The afternoon sun was reflecting off the flawless surface, completely hiding the digital rot spreading inside. 5 seconds. Bradford was still talking on the minimized broadcast, aggressively promising his shareholders unprecedented quarterly returns and massive market dominance. 3 seconds. I took a deep, steadying breath. 1 second. 0. The timer vanished. A single line of bright green text appeared on my screen. Protocol executed. License revoked. I did not need to be inside the building to know exactly what was happening. I had engineered the entire system myself, so I knew the precise, violent sequence of the collapse. At that exact millisecond, deep inside the heavily air-conditioned server farm, the smart contract engaged. It systematically rotated every primary encryption key across the entire global network. It completely severed the vital connection between the user interface and the core processing logic. Across the street, inside the glass tower, absolute chaos erupted. According to the system logs I was passively monitoring on my phone, every single monitor belonging to the engineering and development teams simultaneously flashed from their standard interfaces to a blaring, inescapable screen of bright red alerts. Thousands of critical error notifications cascaded down their displays in a torrential downpour of system failures. The load balancers panicked, unable to locate the core logic they were desperately trying to query. The databases locked down into emergency protective modes to prevent corruption. The entire infrastructure, which processed millions of transactions per minute, slammed into an impenetrable digital wall. My phone screen lit up with another urgent notification. It was an automated news alert. The live broadcast featuring Bradford had suddenly cut to a split screen. On one side, Bradford was still smiling, completely oblivious to his impending doom. On the other side, a frantic breaking news ticker reported that the entire Synapse Horizon global platform had just suffered a catastrophic, completely unexplained outage. I finished my coffee, the bitter taste grounding me in the stark reality of the moment. The invisible woman they thought they could silently erase had just reached out from the shadows and effortlessly pulled the plug on their billion-dollar machine. The collapse did not happen in slow motion. It was an immediate, violent avalanche that crushed the entire corporate structure before anyone could even take a breath. Inside the high-security data rooms on the 35th floor, the external due diligence auditors from the acquiring global conglomerate were in the middle of their final technical review. When my smart contract triggered, their auditing software instantly flagged a catastrophic anomaly. They traced the failure directly to the core algorithm, only to discover that the proprietary digital license, the crown jewel they were paying billions of dollars to acquire, had been officially and legally revoked. It did not take them long to realize that Synapse Horizon no longer owned the very technology that made the company valuable. The auditors slammed their laptops shut and immediately alerted their superiors. The news leaked to the financial sector faster than a wildfire spreading through dry grass. The stock market is a ruthless beast that feeds on stability, and it smelled the blood in the water instantly. Within exactly 2 hours of the system going dark, automated trading algorithms and panicked human investors initiated a massive sell-off. The stock price of Synapse Horizon plummeted a staggering 30%. Billions of dollars in market capitalization evaporated into thin air before the afternoon closing bell even rang. The trading floor was a scene of absolute devastation, with brokers shouting over each other, desperately trying to dump their shares before the value hit absolute zero. Simultaneously, the executives of the acquiring conglomerate were absolutely furious. They felt utterly humiliated and entirely deceived. Their chief legal counsel sent a blazing, high-priority notice directly to the board of directors at Synapse Horizon, threatening not only to completely cancel the merger, but also to launch a devastating countersuit for corporate fraud, severe misrepresentation, and breach of good faith. The beautiful, pristine empire Bradford had bragged about on national television was now nothing more than a smoking crater of legal and financial liabilities. Speaking of Bradford, his rapid descent into total hysteria was a masterpiece of poetic justice. He had rushed back from the television studio to a boardroom completely engulfed in chaos. The slick, arrogant Wall Street persona had completely melted away, replaced by the frantic, sweat-drenched panic of a man watching his entire career burn to ash. According to the internal communication logs I was still passively monitoring, he was screaming at the engineering teams, demanding they hack through the lockdown and manually override my security protocols. The senior developers tried everything. They attempted to reroute the data pipelines. They tried to restore backup servers from the previous week, and they even attempted to physically bypass the primary authentication gateways. But my architecture was flawless. It was a digital fortress, and they did not have the siege weapons required to break it. Every single attempt to bypass the smart contract resulted in an even deeper system lockdown. Realizing that brute force was entirely useless, Bradford finally turned his attention to the one person he had dismissed as an obsolete relic just a few days prior. My phone began to vibrate violently on the coffee shop table. The screen lit up with his personal cellular number, followed closely by his direct office line, and then a barrage of calls from various corporate extensions. He called me 50 times in the span of 1 hour. I did not decline a single call. I simply let the automated system route every single frantic attempt directly into a blocked void. I drank my water, paid my bill, and calmly walked back to my apartment to watch the evening news. By 9 o'clock that night, the desperation of the 42nd floor finally arrived directly at my front door. I was sitting on my living room sofa, reading a book, when the security camera feed from my hallway pinged loudly. Standing outside my apartment was Mia, the young lawyer who had originally tried to warn them, accompanied by two senior legal partners who looked like they had aged 10 years in a single afternoon. They were clutching a thick leather briefcase and sweating profusely under the dim hallway lights. They looked entirely defeated, stripped of all the corporate arrogance that usually defined their profession. "We know you are in there," Mia said, her voice strained and entirely devoid of her usual professional composure. "Please, just open the door. We have a fully authorized settlement agreement right here. Bradford is offering you a guaranteed $5 million, tax-free, paid immediately. All you have to do is log in, reset the cryptographic keys, and bring the core servers back online tonight. We can end this whole nightmare right now." $5 million. It was a massive sum of money to any normal person, but in the context of my original contract, it was a pathetic, insulting fraction of what they actually owed me. They were still trying to negotiate from a completely imaginary position of power. They still thought they could haggle their way out of a lethal digital execution. It was a testament to their enduring ignorance. I did not walk to the door. I did not shout through the wood. I did not engage in a pointless debate with desperate people. I simply picked up my phone and opened the direct messaging application. I took a high-resolution screenshot of a very specific page from the active smart contract ledger. The image clearly displayed the original penalty balance of $25 million, but right beneath it, highlighted in a bright, undeniable red font, was a new, constantly updating figure. It was the daily penalty interest rate explicitly detailed in Clause 14D, a steep percentage that compounded every single 24 hours the primary debt remained unpaid. The number was already climbing rapidly, adding thousands of dollars to the total debt with every passing minute. I typed out a single, definitive reply to Mia and her team standing uselessly in the hallway. "The price is no longer negotiable. The intellectual property rights remain fully locked and will not be restored under any circumstances until the exact, adjusted total balance is successfully transferred and authenticated in my primary bank account. You have a good night." I hit send, completely muted my device, and went to sleep, leaving them standing in the quiet hallway with nothing but a rejected offer and the terrifying realization that their nightmare was only just beginning. By midnight, Bradford had completely lost his grip on reality. In a final desperate bid to save himself, he authorized an incredibly illegal directive. He commanded his most senior cybersecurity engineers to forcibly hack into my secure enclave, bypass the lockdown, and completely erase all digital traces of the smart contract. He mistakenly believed that if he could destroy the digital evidence of Clause 14D, he could deny the financial obligation and pin the entire system failure on me as a rogue act of cyber-terrorism. It was the exact move I had been waiting for him to make. I had spent my entire adult life anticipating the sheer greed of corporate executives. I knew they would eventually try to break the rules rather than honor them. So, I built a secondary failsafe directly behind the first. The exact moment the engineering team executed the unauthorized root access command, they tripped the final wire. My system immediately recognized the hostile intrusion. It did not just block the attack, it retaliated. Over the past few years, the hidden tracking software I had installed had been busy doing much more than logging access attempts. It had quietly compiled a massive, encrypted dossier containing every piece of dirty laundry the upper management tried to bury. When Bradford authorized the hack, the system automatically unsealed that folder. It bypassed the internal network completely and initiated a direct secure data transfer straight to the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission. The transmission contained everything. It sent undeniable proof of Bradford manipulating financial statements, aggressive internal memos detailing the illegal suppression of employee benefits, and most damaging of all, complete digital ledgers of his offshore accounts. The fallout was instantaneous and utterly catastrophic for him. The board of directors held an emergency session at 3 o'clock in the morning. Realizing they were now staring down the barrel of massive federal indictments, they severed Bradford completely to save whatever was left of the sinking ship. He was terminated immediately for gross misconduct, physically escorted out of the building by private security, and stripped of every single share of his stock options. He went from being the king of a billion-dollar tech empire to an unemployed, disgraced executive facing a very long sentence in a federal penitentiary. When Monday morning finally arrived, the air in my apartment was completely still. At exactly 8 o'clock, my phone vibrated softly on the kitchen counter. It was a secure notification from my private wealth management bank. I opened the message. The transfer had completely cleared the international holding accounts. A deposit of $25 million, plus the newly accumulated penalty interest and additional compensatory damages, had been successfully routed into my personal account. I drove to the office one last time to pack my belongings. The atmosphere inside the building was entirely different. It felt like a massive tomb. No one stopped me as I walked past the security desk. I went straight up to the executive suite, walking directly into the sprawling, empty office that used to belong to Bradford Vance. I placed 2 items squarely in the center of his massive mahogany desk. The first was my deactivated employee badge. The second was a completely empty digital storage drive, a silent reminder of the absolute nothingness he was left with. I walked out of the building, got into my car, and drove away. The bright orange hues of the setting sun reflected brilliantly off the glass towers of Austin as I left the city behind. I felt a profound sense of peace. I had built the foundation of their empire with my own hands, and when they tried to bury me beneath it, I simply pulled the floor out from under them. It was a terribly expensive lesson, but perhaps the next generation of executives will finally learn the true cost of disrespecting the invisible people who hold their entire world together. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story today. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please share your city or country in the comments below. If you found today's story entertaining and satisfying, please kindly support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel. There, you can listen to our absolute best, exclusive true stories that are simply too intense to publish on YouTube. You can easily join us by scanning the Patreon QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the direct link provided in the description and the pinned comment of this video. Have a wonderful day.